I have the most wonderful Omm Sety story to tell you about. I'm going to tell you today about a really weird, almost mystical experience that Omm Sety had. This particular experience, because I think this is absolutely fabulous. So, here we go. For what it is worth, I will relate a strange experience that happened to me in 1958. At that time, I was working in the Hall of the Sacred Boats, cataloguing and fitting together about 3,000 pieces of inscribed stone that had once formed the doorways, columns, and window grilles of the magazines and audience halls of the temple. At that time, work was also in progress in roofing the temple, and although I had a key to all the doors, it was easier to get in and out of the building by going up the stairs to the roof, walking along the top of the southern wall of the unroofed western corridor, and then down the scaffolding at the west of the temple. We then had an epidemic of Asiatic flu in the neighbourhood, and I caught it. One morning I was feeling rather bad, and as a couple of aspirin and a short rest had no effect, I decided to call it a day and go home. I went up the stairs and started walking along the top of the wall when I suddenly became very dizzy and fell, twisting my right ankle and hurting my left shoulder. I remember hearing a loud grating sound like that of a grindstone at work, and I rolled down a fairly steep slope. The grating sound was renewed, and I found myself in darkness. After a while, the dizziness passed off enough to allow me to stand up and grope for a wall. I touched some smooth limestone blocks and stood there wondering what to do next. Presently, I sensed very faint threads of light filtering down from above as though through cracks in the roof, and as my eyes became accustomed to the gloom, I found that I was standing in a narrow passage, less than 3 meters or 10 feet wide. A narrow path, perhaps about 50 centimeters, 20 inches wide, ran along the base of the wall, but the remainder of the width of the passage appeared to be completely filled with boxes, offering tables, vases, bales of linen, and everywhere was the gleam of gold. Feeling my way along the wall, I limped along. The passage seemed to be endless, and to my left, crowded with objects. Then, the encounter with Horus. I stumbled and fell, and on trying to rise, I saw what I took to be the god Horus himself bending over me, his hands raised as though in astonishment. From his waist down, he was standing upright, but from the waist upwards was bending over, his fierce falcon face peering down at me, and his double crown sticking out at right angles, without any visible means of support. There I squatted meekly, thoroughly embarrassed and trying to think of how one should address a god under such circumstances. Then I suddenly realized that Horus was only a painted wooden statue, life-sized, and originally standing upright with the arms belt at the elbows and hands raised. But insects had eaten away part of the front of the body, causing the upper part to lean over. Scrambling to my feet, I noticed a similar life-size statue of Osiris and Isis, leaning against the far wall and apparently uninjured. Near where I stood was a golden vase about 25 centimeters or 10 inches high. It had an oval body, a long neck, and a trumpet-shaped mouth, and stood in a wooden ring stand. By the faint light, I could see a cartouche engraved on its body, but it was too dark to read it. But by the length of the frame I knew that it was not the cartouche of Seti, but one of the later kings, perhaps from the 25th or 26th dynasty. I picked it up. It was very heavy, and at first I thought I would take it as evidence of what I had discovered by accident, but finally decided against it and put it down in its place. I began to feel very ill again, but continued to limp along, half unconscious. Suddenly I found myself out in the open air, almost blinded by the sunlight. I was standing beside the well in the second court of the temple, and approaching me was a young man, a stranger. He stared at me in frank astonishment and asked if I knew where the architect in charge of restoration was. I told him, and still staring in surprise, he thanked me and left. I went to enter the temple by the main door, only to find that the keys were not with me. I went around to the back of the temple in order to re-enter the hall of the sacred boats by the way I had left it, when I met two of the gaffers. They cried out, "Where have you been? You are all dirt and cobwebs." And so I was. No wonder the young man had stared at me so hard. I replied that I had fallen down and hurt my ankle and had forgotten my keys. But I didn't tell them any more. I managed to crawl back to the hall of the sacred boats, and there were the keys just as I had left them on the table. Did it really happen? 2 days later, the chief inspector of antiquities for the area came here, and I told him about this experience. He was very astonished and interested, but neither of us could decide if it had really happened or if it was just a hallucination caused by the fever. And to this day, I do not know for certain. All that I'm sure of is that I really fell. My ankle was swollen and painful for a week, and I had a big bruise on my shoulder. Also, I was really covered with dust and cobwebs, and having left the keys behind, there is no way in which I could have reached the front part of the temple, except by going around from the outside, where the gaffers would have seen me, and where, moreover, I would not have collected any dust or cobwebs all over my clothes. If this really did happen, then there is only one possible explanation. I must have hit a stone with my shoulder as I fell, which turned on a pivot and opened into a sloping passage. This would account for the grating sound. But how did I get out again? All I can suggest is that a deserted hyena's lair in the side of the well may have communicated with the treasure passage. Later the lair caved in, but its place remains still clearly visible. The chief inspector got interested and told me to try and find the supposed pivot stone, which I did, in every possible place in the temple, including the blind rooms, but no result, except some more bruises. There is one significant point, however. The paving stones of some of the aisles in the hypostyle halls are large, single slabs, resembling those in the upper blind room. These could well be roofing subterranean passages, but in all other places the paving stones are smaller and irregularly shaped. One thing I am certain of: the Temple of Seti still holds some secrets. As a matter of fact, lots of them. One day, a patient archaeologist may come to Abydos to investigate all its unknown and fascinating possibilities. Maybe he or she will stir the enthusiasm and admiration of the entire world, maybe with something bigger and more important than Lord Carnarvon's discovery of Tutankhamun's mortuary treasures in 1922.